So, much to everyone's disappointment, I'm not talking about SSL version 2. Don't do that. It's got to be car, right? It's nothing else. So, I'm going to keep hold of it until you're not looking. I want to talk today about something called revocation, and I'll talk more about what it is as we go through the introduction sections here, but right now, more and more of us on the web every single day are obtaining certificates. We call them different things. We call them HTTPS certificates, SSL certificates. However you refer to them, they're all the same thing. They're the documents that we need to get if we want HTTPS on our site. So we obtain a certificate, we deploy it in the chase for the green padlock and the green HTTPS. And right now we're actually seeing people adopting HTTPS on their sites at a rate that we've never before seen in history. We are actually deploying HTTPS on the web right now at a tremendous rate. I scan the top 1 million websites on the planet every single day. I publish the data, and every 6 months I produce a report. And one of the things that I track is whether or not the site uses HTTPS. And you can see every 6 months when I produce this report, the amount of sites deploying HTTPS is going up and up. And it's not just a case that they're going up, they're actually going up at a much faster rate. Not only are we continuing to deploy it, we're increasing the rate. If I show this data in a slightly different format, this is the percentage of the top 1 million sites that deploy HTTPS. Can I have my screen? So it's not just a case of we're maintaining the fact that we're deploying HTTPS, we're actually increasing the rate that we're deploying it at. And even today now, we're still only just above 20%, but we are making tremendous progress. And one of the largest reasons for that is people incentivizing the deployment of HTTPS. So there's now loads of really cool features that you can only have on your site if you deploy HTTPS. And organizations like Let's Encrypt that now give away free certificates. They've taken away the cost barrier to deployment, which is one of the things that stop people from doing this. Now, February 2016, when I did one of my reports, they'd only been around for about a month, and as you would expect, they had a very low presence in the top 1 million. But just a year later, and they've shown tremendous growth, and this is continuing again. And this isn't just websites that used to pay for certificates and are now just like, wait, we can get them free. This is actually websites that never had HTTPS before. So we are seeing this tremendous rate of adoption. And the reason that we have certificates, like, we need to go out and get these documents from a CA. And this is the reason why, because secure communications on the internet is not possible without authentication. The certificates are our proof of identity. If we want to set up a website and say we are paypal.com, we need to prove that. That is what the certificate is for. It's to prove that we are who we say we are. So if we think of it, saw that one. If we think of a website on HTTP, we open our browser, we go to the website, and we think we're on PayPal. That's great, but it's trivially easy for an attacker to sit in the middle of that connection. That we have no way of being sure that we're talking to the correct person on the other side until we introduce the concept of a certificate. We can challenge the site to prove their identity to us, and this is why we have certificates. This is the reason that they exist. And we've kind of known about the problem for a long time, the reason that we needed certificates, and it's because nobody on the internet knows that you're a dog. And this holds true. This is literally the reason that we have certificates, because you can't be sure who it is that you're actually speaking to until we introduce the concept of authentication. Now, the certificates themselves are not particularly difficult to obtain. For the people that came to my workshop yesterday, I've done my training, we do this, and it takes a matter of seconds. We have our website, we create something called a CSR, which is just a certificate signing request, and we send that over to our certificate authority. They will challenge us to prove our identity, which is easy for us to do, and if we satisfy that challenge, they give us the certificate back. We deploy it onto our site, and then when the browser comes along, we give the browser the certificate, and we get green HTTPS. Everybody is happy. So it's not a particularly difficult thing to do. And this can all be fully automated and is now free as well, thanks to organizations like Let's Encrypt. And the certificate itself, they aren't really that, there's not that much to them. They're just a text document. They are literally just a text file. You can open these things up and look at them, and they just have certain bits of information inside them that we care about. The common name, which website is this for, who issued it, because the browser needs to know who issued it to see if it trusts the issuer. And things like the valid to and from dates as well. So these are the time periods in which we're allowed to use this document before it expires. And it's this concept of the validity period when we start to look at some of the problems that we have. I'm going to start throwing these back. So, we have... You made me forget where I'm up to in my slides. Right, so if you want to use the certificate's a public document, and we give it to every browser that comes to our website. So obviously it's not as simple as you have the certificate and you give it to the browser, because someone could then just take it and use it. To use the certificate, you need to have the key associated with it on your server. That is what allows you to present the certificate and have the client trust it. But the problem is we don't have perfect security. We do have breaches. We have things like Heartbleed that happened a few years ago. Most of you probably heard about that. When somebody can sometimes obtain a copy of your key. And this presents a really big problem, because once they have a copy of your key, it means they can use your certificate as well. So you now have somebody on the internet who is capable of proving that they are you when they are not you. And this is a really bad situation to be in, because if you're PayPal.com and there's somebody else out there that can prove they are PayPal when they are not, that's about as serious a problem as you can have. So we need some way to stop them from using this certificate after the key has been compromised. We need a way to revoke it, to take back the trust in the document and say, even though it's perfectly valid, I've lost it, something happened, and we need to stop using it. So we need revocation. This is what revocation is. It's taking back the trust in a document that is otherwise trusted, but something has happened, like a compromise. So we have a compromise, we've been breached. We need to start the process of revoking this certificate. And to do that, we generate a revocation request and we send it back to our certificate authority and say, that certificate that you issued to us, we've had a bad day, we've been breached, somebody left their laptop on the bus, whatever happened, you tell them that something has happened and you ask them to revoke the document. And there's two mechanisms that a certificate authority can use to do this. The first one is really simple. It's called a CRL, and it's just a certificate revocation list. So it's literally just a text file, a list of all the certificates that the CA has had revocation requests for. And you can just go download this. It's just a list of all of the documents. OCSP is slightly different. This is the Online Certificate Status Protocol. And instead of having to download a big list of certificates, you can just ask the OCSP responder, is this particular certificate revoked? Yes or no. So the CA updates this information on there, and then this information becomes available to anybody that wants to query it. Now, if you've been compromised, somebody has your certificate, has your key, the browser needs to know about that. So it has to do what we call revocation checking. So the browser comes along, it goes and gets the certificate from the site. But before it accepts that certificate, once it's got it, once it's checking the certificate, it will reach out to the CRL server, because the certificate contains the address of where the CRL can be downloaded. So the browser downloads a copy of the revocation list. And it says, right, I've just got the certificate, I'll download the revocation list. And if this certificate's on the list, I know it's bad. I know not to use it because it's been marked as revoked. And it's a fairly simple process. This is literally all there is to revocation checking when you're using a CRL. And if you use OCSP, it's not that much different either. OCSP is literally just a yes-no response back instead. So instead of downloading the full CRL, you just say, is this particular certificate revoked, yes or no? And the responder will just send back, yes or no. It's good to use it, or don't use it, it's bad. So these sound like two really simple mechanisms, and they did work originally when they were first introduced, and we have to have mechanisms like this. We have to be able to revoke certificates, but there were problems, there were issues with both of these different approaches. And the first of these is that if the browser gets this certificate from a website, it doesn't know, I'm going to throw these back in a minute, it doesn't know whether or not the host is genuine. So it has to revocation check every single time. So every time it comes across this certificate, even if the last time was only 10 minutes ago, it could have been revoked in the last 10 minutes. The browser doesn't know, so it has to revocation check every single time it sees the certificate, because any amount of caching will kind of defeat the purpose. So no matter whether it's a valid host or not, whether you're under attack or not, no matter what happens, the browser has to reach out and do either one of these two requests. In some way, it has to check the revocation status of that document. But what if your CA is having a really bad day and their revocation infrastructure looks like this? They've gone offline, they've been DDoSed out of existence, someone turned off the power in their data center, whatever, it doesn't matter. But their revocation infrastructure is down. What does the browser do now? what can the browser do? It's reached out to both of these revocation servers and said, give me some information, and there's nothing there, there's no one at the other end. So at this point, historically, what used to happen is what we call a hard fail. So it would reach out and try and do this request, and if the server wasn't there and it couldn't get a response, it would close this connection, because it's like, well, I can't check the status of the certificate, I don't know if this certificate is good or bad, so I'm just going to close the connection and not accept it. And this is a really big problem, because what that meant was, that is going back, what that meant was if your CA went down, if their infrastructure went down, they pulled your website down as well. So your CA had the capability to take you offline if their infrastructure went down. And we didn't like having that third-party organization with the capability to take us offline. So there were some changes in Revocation to kind of try and fix this. And that, yeah, so that's when it threw me off with that bloody ball. So yeah, so when their infrastructure is offline, it terminates this connection. It's a massive problem. We can't have a third party that can literally do this to us. It's a really bad situation to be in. But that isn't the only problem with these mechanisms. There's actually quite a few more issues. And the first one specifically, with the CRL, with that revocation list, it's a list of all documents that the CA has revoked. So it's a list of all certificates that's ever been revoked, and the browser downloads it and looks through. How big do you think that file is? Have a guess.
As big as you got.
How big? Someone shout out a number.
37.
7.
So about 50 kilobytes. So do we think that would be fairly reasonable?
Not that big.
Downloading a file like that? What if they were 500 kilobytes?
Way too big for that.
What if they were a meg?
That's what she said.
What if they were 10 meg? What if when a browser connected to your website, it had to download a 10 meg file to check if your certificate was valid? That's not going to work very well on a 2G connection in the middle of a field when you're trying to open Facebook or something. But what if it hit 50 meg? What if it hit, like 2 months ago, Apple's CRL hit 90 meg? So if you wanted to do the revocation check, you would have to pull down a 90 meg file to see if the certificate was revoked. Now this isn't scale. This is a big problem. Question?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have to pull that file down every time you connect to the website then?
So some clients would try and cache this file for a short period, but you sacrifice the freshness when you cache, which introduces its own risks. So they could cache it for like a 24-hour period, but you're still pulling down a 90 meg file every day. It's still not ideal, because the one time when you have to download it, you'll be on a 2G connection in the field. So there were a couple of things that the clients would do, and caching the CRL was one of them. But all caching defeats freshness, and it still introduces more risk. And we still don't want to be downloading files that are this big. And this was just CRL. OCSP wasn't that perfect either, because with a CRL, you're just downloading a list, and it doesn't really tell anybody much. But with OCSP, you're asking for the status of the specific certificate. So you're saying, I've just got this one certificate. Is this valid? Yes or no? And the problem is when you send that request to the CA, the question that you're asking basically looks like this. You're literally asking them, is the certificate for the website I'm about to go to valid or not? And you're leaking all of your browsing history to the certificate authority when you do this. So OCSP fixed the massive file size problem, but it introduced a huge privacy concern as well, on top of the hard fail issue. So all of these mechanisms had, well, quite a few drawbacks. And what that led to was some changes in how we do things. So browsers used to reach out and do one of these two checks, and they used to do hard fail checks. We eventually threw that away because of the issue that we talked about, and they started doing soft fail checks. So they would say, we're going to reach out to the CRL server, to the OCSP responder, and we'll try to get a response. But if we don't get a response, or it takes too long, or the server's down, then we're just going to abandon that check and accept the certificate and carry on. Now, this fixes some of the concerns, but it also introduces a new set of concerns of its own, because an attacker can simulate the CA being offline. All an attacker has to do, if they're on the network, is if they block this connection and they make it look like the certificate authority is offline, the browser will go, right, I'm going to do the revocation check. Oh, the CA's down. Never mind. I won't do it. And soft fail, when we switched to doing soft fail quite a few years ago now, it completely broke revocation checking, because if the attacker can terminate this connection, the browser will think that your CA is down or having a bad day or whatever, and it will just soft fail through, and it will not do the revocation check, and it will accept the certificate. So when we switched to software revocation checking, we did it because we didn't want the CA to be able to take us down, but software revocation checking is basically pointless. The best analogy that I've heard was a guy called Adam Langley at Google, and he said it's a seatbelt that snaps in a car crash. And he's right, and it is, because you get in your car and you put your seatbelt on every single day. You get in your car and you put your seatbelt on every single day, and 99% of the time you put your seatbelt on, you don't use it, you don't need it, it doesn't matter. But the one time that you do need it, you have a crash and it snaps and you go out the windscreen. Because that one time when you actually need this check, the attacker will block it and it will fail. So the one time that you need it is useless. So when we switched to software revocation checking, we broke it. It's just completely bust now, and it is useless, and still to this day is. So what the browsers did is they said, well, we're doing these checks, and really they're kind of pointless because the only time they'll work is the times that we don't need them. So they used to do this, and what the browsers now do is this. They don't bother. Chromium hasn't done any form of revocation checking for probably about 2.5 years now. Firefox is still doing soft fail, but they've just announced that in September the stable branch will stop doing revocation checking as well. They're abandoning it because it's a performance overhead and it has zero benefit. Because the attacker will just block the connection, the browser will abandon it, and what was the point in sending the request in the first place? But this is a really bad place to be. This is a really bad situation because revocation is broken, but these documents are really powerful, they're really important, they're our proof of identity. And if we have a bad day and we lose one, somebody can take that document and abuse it for as long as it's valid, and we can't stop them from doing that. And that's not a great place to be, especially when more and more of us every day are going out and getting more and more certificates. So we're only going to see the issues arising of people losing them more often. So looking forwards, because that's the current stance, that's how it is right now today. It's broken, the browsers are abandoning it, and they aren't doing it. And we're now looking forwards at ways that we can try to fix this, because we're all getting more certificates. We've got to solve this problem. So there's a couple of things that Chromium and Firefox have done so far. And one of them is they've both built a proprietary mechanism. Chrome calls theirs CRL sets, and Firefox calls theirs one CRL. And what they do as a browser vendor is they will reach out to all the CRL servers of the different certificate authorities around the planet. They will scrape all of those CRLs together, and then they will select what they call high-value certificates out of this big combined list. So instead of the browser or the client having to do this now, the vendors themselves are actually pulling down these lists and creating their own kind of single compact version. That's why Firefox call it one CRL. They're building one CRL from all of the CRLs in existence. But the only problem is they can't put like a 6, 7, 8 gig file into the browser. So they are incredibly strict on the ones that they accept, to the point where I'm never going to get mine in there, you're never going to get yours in there, and nobody you know is going to get theirs in there. This is literally for the highest value revocations in existence. So maybe if PayPal lost a certificate, maybe if Facebook did, they would possibly get theirs in there. But it's basically only for high value CA certificates. No website is really ever going to get their certificate into one of these lists. So it kind of fixes a tiny bit of a problem, but not for general users like us. The next thing that we can look at is, this is kind of the first step towards fixing revocation, and we need to use something called OCSP Stapling. Now, we talked about OCSP, and it was where the browser would reach out to the OCSP responder and say, is this certificate revoked, yes or no? And that had the privacy issue we talked about when you ask, is the certificate for Pornhub.com revoked? Now, what happens with stapling is, instead of the client making that request, instead of the browser making it, we as the host make it. So we make the request, and we get the OCSP response, and we cache that on our server. And it's called OCSP stapling because the idea is that we will get the OCSP response, staple it to our certificate, and give it to the client with both the certificate and the stapled response. Now, this sounds a bit weird at first because we're effectively self-certifying our own certificate, but the OCSP response is signed by the CA in the same way that our certificate is signed. So just like the browser can look at our certificate and validate it, it can also look at the OCSP response and validate that as well. So it can't be forged, it can't be tampered with, and it fixes the performance and privacy overhead on the client side. Because if we have 10 million visitors a day, those 10 million visitors would make 10 million OCSP requests. We can just make one and cache it for the day and staple it to 10 million people. So OCSP stapling fixes a large amount of the problems with OCSP, but not all of them. And the biggest problem that we have is that OCSP stapling is optional. It's just a performance optimization. It's not really a security feature. Is that a question?
Yeah, how long does an OCSP response take typically?
7 days maximum.
And is that typically what OCSP response will do?
Yeah, so most OCSP responders are actually fronted by a CDN anyway, so they won't actually sign on the fly live OCSP responses. They'll sign one and they'll just put it in the CDN's cache for 24 hours and then put another one there the day after. So with the stapled responses, that's great, but like I say, it's optional. And the problem is the client doesn't know, does this server have OCSP stapling? Were they meant to OCSP staple? Like, there's no way of indicating that. It's just an optional performance optimization for the client. We should all do this, because there are still clients out there that do live OCSP checks, so we need to fix that privacy leak for them. And it will also make our sites load faster. But it's not the ultimate solution, because the bad guys are never going to turn on OCSP stapling and effectively rat themselves out that they have a revoked certificate. So we need to take it a step further. And OCSP must staple is a new mechanism that's been introduced this year, and it fixes the optional nature of OCSP stapling. So what we do, when we request our certificate from the CA, we ask them to set a special flag in it. And this flag says, when the certificate is served, it must be served with an OCSP staple. You can't serve it without one. It's no longer optional. It is a requirement. Now for us it doesn't really change much. We just get the certificate like normal and serve it to the client. It doesn't change anything at all, apart from the fact that we now have to OCSP staple instead of it being optional. And literally, we just take the document that we had before, and we just add a new value into it. I said the certificate is just a text file. We just literally add a new line of text in there that says, we've set this extension called OCSP must staple. So when the browser receives that, and it sees this flag in the certificate, it will look for the OCSP staple to see if it's there. And if it's not, it will reject the document. It will reject the certificate. And that kind of fixes a big part of the problem, because when we combine must staple certificates and OCSP stapling together, we have a reliable revocation checking mechanism now. Because if we serve the document without the staple, the browser will reject it, which is what the attacker would historically do. But they can't do that anymore. They can't serve it without the staple. So with these two mechanisms combined, we can fix revocation as it currently stands. But the reliability of OCSP stapling then becomes a problem. If you can't get an OCSP response, or your server has a bit of a bug in it. There's a current known bug in Apache where you fetch the OCSP response, and if it's malformed, Apache won't detect that, and it will cache and staple the malformed response rather than fetch a new one. That will take your site offline, because you aren't OCSP stapling. So I'm hoping that over the coming months, the server vendors will become much better in their support of stapling, because we do need to have revocation. We can't have these documents floating around on the internet when anybody can use them, and we can't stop them. One of the other kind of issues that we want to look at is, the attacker can't get the OCSP response, and that fails the connection, because they won't OCSP staple, and if they do staple, the response says the cert's revoked. So it doesn't matter which way they do it, it's game over for all the bad guys. But this is for certificates that we got. So we go get a certificate, and then we lose it. We get hacked, Heartbeat comes along, whatever. But there are occasions when other people can get certificates and we don't know about them. CAs have been compromised. They issue certificates in error to the wrong people. Or maybe it's just somebody inside our organization has got one, and they've not gone through the correct policies, and we don't know that they've done it. We need to have more transparency in the ecosystem, because right now, if I go get a certificate for any of your websites, how would you know? Unless I actually told you, how would you know that I had a certificate for your site? And this is another big problem, because if I can get that document and keep it a secret from you, you can't even try to revoke it, because you don't know it exists. So we need to bring transparency to the ecosystem so that if there is a certificate in existence for your site, you can know about it. And to do that, we're introducing another mechanism. It was originally coming out in September this year, but they've just backed off on the deadline until April next year after some pushback from the industry. But certificate transparency is going to fix this lack of transparency in the ecosystem that we have, where I can get a certificate for your site and you can not know about it. Now, the CT introduces an extra requirement onto your certificate authority. So they still have the largely useless revocation infrastructure to look after, and they now have something called a CT log, which is a certificate transparency log. And the CAs will be required to log an entry. This is a completely publicly available and auditable log. They are required to log an entry into that when they generate a certificate for a domain. And the idea is that you can look at this log and you can see every time a CA issues a certificate, they have to write an entry into the log. So you watch that log, and if you see your domain name pop up, you know a certificate has just been issued for your domain. Now, we don't want the client to have to introduce another check into the CT log. You know, we've learned that having it check the CRL and the OCSP responder had its issues. So the client doesn't actually do any direct checking like you would expect into a CT log, but we still need to prove to the client that the certificate has been logged in CT. How do we know that this isn't some secret backroom deal when the certificate's been issued and no one has been told? So we have something called an SCT. So when the certificate authority submits the certificate to the log and says, I've generated this certificate, I want to make it public, I want to write it into the log will give it back an SCT. This is a signed certificate timestamp. And this is a cryptographic proof that this certificate went into this log at this time. And that is a proof that that has happened. So the CA can say, I can definitely prove that I've done this, because here's the SCT to show that I did this. And all the CA needs to do is get that SCT to the client. And it doesn't have to be the CA that submits this. You as yourself can do this as a host, as the website operator, or you as a person can actually do this. You can just go grab a certificate right now and just write a log into the CT logs. They're completely open infrastructure. They're completely open logs. You can go and put an entry in there. Now, the problem is getting that SCT to the client, because we need to prove to the client, to the browser, that it's been logged in CT, that it's not some kind of secret or hidden or stolen certificate. And the easiest way, and the way that I think that this will happen for 99.9% of websites on the planet, is when we send that CSR over to the CA and say to them, please issue us a certificate, the CA will log it at that point into CT on our behalf. So they will do it, they will generate the certificate, and they will write the CT log entries. Now the current requirements are that you have to put it in at least 3 CT logs, and at least one of them has to be operated by Google, and at least one of them has to not be operated by Google. This is just so we have some redundancy and some resilience. So the CA submits something called the pre-certificate, which is just your document before it's issued to you, and they get the SCTs back from those logs. So they say, right, we've now got our proof that we've definitely put this certificate into these logs. And they just embed those into the certificate when they issue it to us. They literally just pop them inside the document and send us the certificate as normal, and then we send that certificate to the browser. And the browser can see the SCTs inside the certificate. So it now has everything that it needs to know that this has definitely been written into a CT log. And we as a server, we don't have to do anything different. We don't do anything at all. We just get our certificate as normal and use it as normal. And CT just happens. I think most websites actually won't even know that CT is a thing, because it will all just magically work without them ever being aware. And it's kind of good that it's like that, because otherwise it would probably never happen. But at the same time, I don't think we should be introducing new mechanisms when site operators literally aren't even aware that this new mechanism has been introduced. It's kind of a weird one. They're really pushing like the advertisement of this, but it doesn't matter where I go. People aren't aware of CT and that this new thing is coming, because it's in the CA's interest to get this right. Because if they get this wrong, your certificates will stop working, which means your website stops working. So it's in their interest to get this right, but I don't know, just blindly hoping that they do get this right, because if they get it wrong, you go down, the site goes offline. So I think CT is going to be massively important. And if you don't want to depend on your CA like this, if you don't want to hope that they get it right, you can actually take matters into your own hands. And there's another mechanism to get the SCT to the client, rather than depending on your CA. We can use something called a TLS Feature Extension. And it looks very similar. We get our certificate as normal, and what we do is we log it into CT ourselves, and then we get the SCTs back. And just like we could OCSP staple, which we just talked about, where we just send an arbitrary document to the client, we can just send the SCTs at the same time as well. So we've taken control of the situation. We now choose which logs we log to, we choose which SCTs we send, and we have control of this new feature. We're not just hoping that our CA has done it for us. We can actually do this ourselves. The problem with this is that this requires some fair level of technical implementation on the host. We'd actually have to select our logs, make sure those logs meet the requirements, make sure that they're resilient and robust and that they're not going to go away on Tuesday. And we then take this kind of level of responsibility with it. So it's good in that you can take control of this, you can control your own fate, as it were, but you can also screw everything up. So it depends on your stance on this. The last way that we can get the SCT to the client, and I don't think that anybody's going to use this probably, is with OCSP stapling. So when we get our certificate as normal, the CA will log it as normal, but then instead of giving it to us, they will put the SCTs onto their OCSP responder. When we fetch the OCSP response to staple it, it contains the SCTs. And then we just OCSP staple as normal, and we can deliver it to the client that way as well. This is largely still dependent on the CA to get things right. They choose the logs, they do everything. So it shares the same problems with the first mechanism. But it still gets the SCTs to the client with minimal work on our part, because all we have to do is turn on OCSP stapling, which is literally an on-off switch in your config. So CT is going to be a brilliant thing. I can't wait for CT to get here, and I'm a bit miffed that they pushed the deadline back after pressure from the CA industry saying they couldn't get ready in time. Because we need this level of transparency. We can't have certificates for our site floating around on the internet, and for us to have no way to audit what documents exist that have our name on them. We need this mechanism. We need CT. So I'm looking forward to that. Unfortunately, as I say, it's now April next year instead of September this year. And the other problem as well, we have yet another issue that we need to resolve, and it's that right now any CA on the planet can issue a certificate for your website. There's 300 or 400 or so of them, including resellers, and they can all issue a certificate for you. Now the idea is that you're supposed to ask them to issue you one, and they're supposed to check who you are, but things don't always go to plan. And you have no way as a host, as a website, of saying, I only want to buy my certificates from DigiCert, or I only want to get them from Let's Encrypt. There is no way for you to say, this is the CA that I choose and I only want to use them. And we're now fixing that with another new mechanism. And it fixes this problem of there being literally hundreds, there are quite literally hundreds of these CAs out there. And we want to just throw all these away and say, we don't want to use any of these, we want to use this one or these two, whoever they are. You as a host should be able to assert your authority, your choice in this matter. And with Certificate Authority or Authorization, or CAA, you can now do that. And I really like CAA because it is as simple a mechanism as you can possibly get. Because it's literally just a DNS record. You literally set a DNS record. We've created a new resource record type. There's a new standard for this. It's type 257. And you literally just put the address of the CA that you authorize to issue certificates for you. So if you only want to have Let's Encrypt issue certificates for you, and you want to tell all of the CAs, you're not authorized to do this, I do not give you permission, you just set Let's Encrypt there. If you want to get certificates from 3 CAs, then you just create another 2 records and put them in there. And it will be, from the 7th of September this year, the CAs will be mandated, they will be required, under the baseline requirements, to check these DNS records and to abide by what they say. If they do not, they can be punished under the baseline requirements. So, this is super simple, and this is really easy to do, but again, I don't come across much information about CAA out there. We can prevent certificates being issued without our authorization. And sometimes it's not even necessarily a hostile act. If you as a company have a contractual agreement that we will buy all certificates from DigiCert, and then one of your members of staff goes off and buys them from somewhere else, you know, you can have internal policy issues with this. You can prevent that from happening with CAA by just locking yourself to the CAA that you have an obligation with. Now, CAA is only checked by the CA at the point of issuance. Again, we didn't want to introduce a new burden on the client to have to do a DNS lookup and check this record, because we've learned that these outbound requests on the client are bad. So this is only checked by the CA at the point of issuance. So there's no ongoing check on the requirement, no ongoing check or requirement on the client to look at this record. So there's nothing, there's no performance impact, there's no concern, there's not going to be a privacy leak. CAA is incredibly simple and incredibly easy. So, which one am I on?
Last slide.
Thanks for that. It's too long here. This is what that looks like. We send our CSR as normal to the CA, and before they issue our certificate, so prior to them giving it us back, the CA has to make one single request into DNS to fetch that CAA record and say, you know, who are the CAs that are authorized to issue for this domain, and check if I am one of them. If they are one of those that are authorized, then they can issue the certificate and send it back to us. So that's it. It's one single DNS lookup by the CA at the point of issuance. So with all of these mechanisms combined that we've talked about, we still aren't quite at reliable revocation. We still aren't quite all of the way there, but CT especially is the first step. And we need transparency and we need the ability to restrict issuance before we can actually have a reliable revocation mechanism. Because if we have the best revocation mechanism in the world, but you don't know that you have certificates that need to be revoked, then there's not much point. We've got to take the first step, which is full transparency and awareness. And the ability to audit kind of, you know, where are we? What's our current situation? So these documents are incredibly important. You're responsible for obtaining them, looking after them. And right now, as it stands, if you lose a certificate, if you're deploying HTTPS and you're going out and getting certs, if you lose one right now, you have to live with that for the duration. And, you know, if you lose that, can you live with it? Can you have somebody on the internet who can prove that they are you when they are not you? How big an impact is that for your organization? How bad would that situation to be? So the question that I want to leave you with is, can you revoke a certificate? Could you do this? If you were compromised, if you were breached, if something happened, could you go out there and actually undo what had happened? Thank you very much. So, questions. I'm hoping I've left time for Q&A. I'm hoping there are some. Yes?
It sounds great for internet-based stuff, but is there anything back to the general OCSP checking for changing the policy for particular domains? So let's say you had an internal API and you wanted to put a hard fail on for your internal domain. Anything like that?
So you used to be able to do that in Chrome. The question there was, can you manually force hard fail? And when Chromium first took out the ability to do the revocation checking at all, and they just completely stopped, they did actually have an option in their admin interface to turn it back on and force the check to happen. And back when that happened, I wrote a blog explaining how to do that, because I was like, we weren't really there at the time. And Chrome then just took the option out of the GUI. So no, you can't do this in Chrome. You haven't been able to even manually force this in Chrome for a long time. The option is still there in Firefox today. You can still go into the config in Firefox and force OCSP checks, but not on a per domain basis. It's for the client, for the browser. So the problem is that if you did that now, you would probably break other websites, yeah, in a small percentage of the time, but realistically, you couldn't force that without causing damage elsewhere. If the client was not a browser, then you can just configure the client to do whatever you want. You know, most of these technologies are largely browser-based. If you're writing a custom client, you can choose how you deal with that. Yeah, go.
What prevents, I like the idea of certificate authority authorization record.
Yeah.
But what prevents me now, me as a site owner or an attacker, to subvert DNS records and actually get the CA punished for no reason?
So, I guess there's 2 points to that. Is one, if the attacker was able to do something to affect the DNS lookup, they would have to be between your DNS provider and the CA. That means they're on a tier 1 ISP, which means they're probably a nation state. So,
or DNS poison.
yeah, potentially, but you've still got to get access to that link between the CA and the authoritative DNS server, and that is really pretty difficult to do. The other part, I mean, technically it's possible, it's just really difficult to do. The other part is then, let's flip this around the other way. So, the CA is going to say, we checked DNS and it was there, and we issued as a result. And they're going to be penalized. But we have this problem already with all of the other types of checking that we do, even for issuance. If the CA challenges you to prove your identity and sends you an email or something, or most of the time now we just do a simple API call and host a file. How do you prove that you actually set something in DNS or didn't? How do you prove that as a host? You know, we have this kind of inherent trust in the system that someone's issued a certificate and I say, well, I didn't have them authorized in the CAA. And they say, well, we were because we checked it. Where would you even go with that? you know, there are still some issues in this. It's not perfect, but we're working towards fixing it.
What about CRL deltas?
So CRL deltas just make things really messy and really hard work. So a CRL delta is, when I was talking about the size of the certificate revocation list and Apple's hitting 90 meg, what the CA can do, you're talking about sharding onto individual CRLs. So the CA can, when they issue a certificate, instead of having like one master CRL, they can say, okay, well, we'll have like 20. And each time we issue a certificate, we'll just say, if we revoke it, we'll put it in this list, so check this list. And that list would then be a 20th of the size of the overall one. But the CAs would need to shard more and more and more to keep the files smaller and smaller and smaller. And once you've committed to your sharding policy, you can't change that easily on an ongoing basis. It introduces more overheads for the CA because then they need to maintain this. And effectively, what you're moving towards there is basically OCSP, because if you take sharding to the longest extent, is like you would have one CRL per certificate, and that's basically OCSP. So we just kind of skipped right over that and went to OCSP instead. How so?
Because the deltas are going to appear in time, so what's one in the last 7 days, you go back to the baseline. One would naturally roll off the bottom when the certificates expire. So
the certificates already roll off the bottom and they expire anyway. That's one optimization that's always happened. Because obviously, once it's expired of old age, you don't need to keep in there. But, so on a time-based delta thing, you would...
So all the ones that probably broke in the last 7 days, and you can say, last time I checked, so you may have a new one.
Oh, so just the client do that?
Yeah.
Right, okay, yeah. That requires agreement on a protocol and a scheme and all of the endpoints to implement that and like... No, yeah. The problem is that realistically that wouldn't happen. That's just the simple answer. It's like, we need to think of a better way, because if we tried to start working on that now, it would just take forever.
We just avoid like revocation altogether, but by using short-lived certificates.
Yes. So the problem with the reason that we have revocation is because these documents have a long life expectancy. Right now, you can get a 3-year certificate. So if you get a 3-year certificate and lose it in the first month, the attacker has got 2 years and 11 months to abuse that document before it expires. If you get a certificate that's only valid for 30 days and you lose it in even a couple of weeks, the attacker has a much shorter window with which to abuse the document before it expires. So this is one of the directions that we're currently going with, and it's why Let's Encrypt that I talked about, they only issue 90-day certificates maximum. So pulling down the max age of the certificate reduces the risk in a compromised scenario, but realistically, to get to a point where we didn't need revocation, we'd need to get down to 7-day certificates renewed every day. And if we tried to do that, we would literally set all of the CAs on fire. We would just crucify them. So yes, long term, and the reason that we go for 7 days is because that's the validity period of an OCSP response. So if we're happy with OCSP responses at 7 days, then we're happy with 7-day certs. But that's like a decade away. And good luck getting sites to renew a certificate every day. Right now, they don't like doing it every 3 years. So ultimately, yes, I can't wait to get there. Very short-lived certificates will be great, but it's too far in the future for us to wait for that to happen.
What specifically is the change that's happening in April to do with certificate transparency in the browser?
It's going to be mandated.
GDPR.
It's going to be mandated that all certificates be logged in CT or Chromium will not accept them. So right now it's optional. But all of the CAs are already starting to log and kind of warming up their processes to get to April, and then Chrome will just outright reject them if they aren't logged in CT. And once Chrome does that, it's basically a requirement because, well, you can have a certificate, but it doesn't work in Chrome. Like, good luck.
Not just EV, but all.
All certificates, yeah, all certificates. Every single certificate that the browser receives will have to be logged in CT. What's that for?
Yeah, it seems to me that the actual kind of implementation of certificate transparency is very different to how it was originally.
Yeah.
Log servers aren't supposed to be trusted, and the client is supposed to put the log server. But now we're just relying on the SCTs. So it seems to me that log servers are fully trusted. And I thought the original purpose of CT is not to trust certificate authorities to not be broke. So aren't we just transferring our trust to GA to the log server?
That's why there's the requirement of 3 independent CT logs, one operated by Google and one not. So we have that diversity in the ecosystem, in that if you wanted to be a malicious log operator, you would have to be all of the log operators. And realistically, you wouldn't you wouldn't be able to get to that point, and that's why we have the trust by the browsers. So the browser has to say, we trust this log and we will trust CTs from this log. But that's where the minimum 3, part of it, because some of it's redundancy as well, but that's where the diversity requirement of having logs both operated by Google and not operated by Google came from.
So in a way, it's like multi-factor authentication.
Kind of. Yeah, because it's not... CT doesn't give us any assurance other than the fact that the host has the possibility to know this certificate exists, i.e. it's not been issued in secret. Other than that, CT doesn't really give us anything. That's all it's supposed to give us. So all the browser can say when it gets a certificate and it gets the SCTs is, if this certificate is dodgy, the host should definitely know about it because it's been written into a CT log, so they've had the opportunity to discover it. That's all CT gives us, which is all it was designed to do. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, OCSP, great, wonderful, all of this brilliant. It's making it really hard though now to run an internal CA. We're finding that because our standard configuration is OCSP Stapling, but now we're getting browsers on the VPN can't get to the CA because the CA is on a different network. It's getting really difficult.
So these internal sites?
Yeah.
You should come on my 2-day training course and we'll fix that for you. Without getting too much into the depths of PKI, if you're using a private CA and internal domains, you really shouldn't be OCSP checking. So yeah, I wouldn't bother in that scenario.
It's becoming more and more a thing, and the browsers are becoming to the point where, in 6-8 months' time, next release of Chrome, it'll be OCSP mandated.
No, it'll be CT mandated next year. OCSP won't be mandated unless you set must staple in the certs. But yeah, catch me afterwards. We'll talk more in depth about that. It's slightly off piece. Yeah, further at the back.
Building on that, how they handle the proxy situation.
Just go into that a bit more depth. What kind of scenario? So if the client's behind a proxy and can't...
So effectively, if you have clients behind a proxy and clients are running Chrome internally, but you are not allowing them direct access to the internet, so effectively they'll be relying on the proxy as their CA.
So would the client have a root certificate installed by the proxy? Is the proxy doing interception? So in most scenarios like that, when you have a root certificate installed on the client endpoint, we already consider that to be a compromised scenario, so most security mechanisms are already disabled. CT is no longer a requirement if you change to a privately installed root, and neither are things like HPKP as well. So there's no requirement if you change.
So under that circumstance, it's not mandatory?
No, because most things are pretty much just overridden and disabled if you change to a user-installed root certificate.
The comment you made earlier is you would normally able to disable it, now it's going to be mandatory. Mandatory implies mandatory.
Yeah, but the exception is, it's for public CAs, it's for certificates that change to a publicly trusted root. So it doesn't apply to private CAs.
So you can disable it within Chrome?
No, you can't disable it. Chrome will just not check it if it's a private CA.
Okay.
So that's the way out. That's how we save it.
Okay.
Yes?
If you've got you're basically in the CT log, and then the CA puts something in the CT log.
Yep.
Now you've got potentially different servers, different logs, potentially with different data.
Okay.
What's going to happen?
What happens there is that if you log a certificate that's already been logged, the CT log will just give you the SCT from the previous log. It won't add a new entry. Yes?
CAA sounds a lot like Dane with designated CAs. Is that still a thing?
Dane is still a thing, but we're not seeing any adoption or interest in adoption by browsers. The problem I think that we always see with Dane is that you're just shifting the issue of the publicly trusted CA to someone else. So you're still having somebody else, because you have a dependency on DNSSEC when you use Dane, you still have a dependency on somebody else to sign something for you. So it's kind of like, what's the point in moving? We're just moving the problem from one person to the other and we're still in exactly the same situation. It would fix the revocation problem, but it's not worth that level of effort to do that when we still have the other inherent issues with using trusted third parties.
But HTTP will be quicker.
Would what?
HTTP.
HPKP?
HTTP.
What? Are you making up acronyms?
No.
You mean public keeping? Is it a serious question? No, he's trolling. Okay. I'm not asking Mike.
Can we go back?
Which one? The big one? No, you can't.
With the CAA, are we going to be able to embed DNS records so you don't have to update every single domain with your DNS record? You can just have one central one that it links to?
So do you mean across separate domains or like
Yeah,
subdomains?
let's say you've got the .co.uk, .com, and...
No, you'd have to set one DNS record for each TLD.
You can't do it the same way as you would do an SPF record and you just embed them.
No, there's nothing. Literally, one of the goals of CAA was simplicity. So you would have to create a new CAA record for each TLD.
100 domains.
Yeah, you have to set 100 records, unfortunately. Any more questions? GDPR, man?
We talked a lot about logs, but could you explain was it sharding?
Such an ass. Are there any serious questions? Yes?
Which would you choose between a bike helmet and a Vader helmet?
Vader every time, man. Come on, don't ask. Any more serious questions than that? No, are we good? Alright, thank you very much.